Welcome to the deep dive. You know, I was just picturing this kind of old-timey game show.
Uh-huh.
And the lightning round question is, how do you spot a virgin?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Can you even imagine the answers people came up with? Like, apparently, way back when, some folks thought neck proportions were a dead giveaway.
Neck proportions.
You-
Serious.
Seriously. Then there was this whole theory about pee clarity.
Good grief.
And get this, a really bizarre vapor bath idea that, well, let's just say science has definitely moved on.
Yeah.
It really makes you stop and think, how much of what people believed was just kind of bonkers.
It absolutely does. And it's actually the perfect way to kick off our discussion today.
Right.
We've been sifting through some really fascinating material, and our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Right.
It's to figure out what these sources actually tell us about this whole concept of virginity. Like, is it a concrete thing, a biological reality sort of etched into our bodies, or is it maybe something much more nuanced?
Exactly. Because as we both kind of dove into the research, it got really clear, really fast, that we're dealing with layers of history, a surprising lack of actual biological evidence,
Right.
and just a whole lot of social expectations piled on top.
Yeah.
So for you tuning in, we're going to try and unpack all this, separate the facts from the fiction, and really get to the core insights our sources are offering here.
Okay, so maybe let's start right at the beginning. Like, what actually sparked this whole idea of virginity in the first place?
Good question.
One of the most, thought-provoking theories that came up from our material connects it to a massive turning point in human history,
Which one?
the dawn of farming, and the whole concept of owning land.
Farming. Okay, that's not the first thing I'd think of. But the sources were pretty compelling on this, weren't they? How did planting seeds lead to this whole idea?
Well, what's fascinating, right, is how that shift to agriculture brought about the idea of private property. Suddenly, inheritance, like who gets the farm, who gets the resources, that became super important.
Okay.
And in those early patriarchal societies, men apparently needed a way to be sure that their biological kids were the ones inheriting.
Right, okay.
It wasn't just about knowing who the mother was. Certainty about the father became crucial.
Gotcha. Because if you're building a legacy, through land and stuff, you want to be absolutely sure those inheriting are actually your bloodline.
Exactly.
So how did that need, the paternal certainty thing, latch on to the idea of female virginity specifically?
Well, if you connect the dots, the thinking seems to have been that controlling a woman's sexual activity before marriage, that was seen as the most reliable way for a man to guarantee that the children she had within the marriage were his.
Oh, okay.
The idea was basically to ensure her first sexual encounter was with him. One of our sources kind of playfully put it like, think of an early version of Old MacDonald had a farm, and he really wanted to control his wife's sexual history.
Wow, okay. So this need for, patriarchal control over who inherits stuff was the initial spark.
It seems like a leading theory, yeah.
And from there, the sources show how this idea just got, deeply embedded in Western culture, didn't it? It wasn't just some passing fad.
Precisely. Our material really highlights how, over centuries, the idea of female premarital virginity as a sort of valuable asset became really ingrained. You see it reflected in, historical artwork, religious teachings, legal systems, even in stuff like teen movies today.
Which then probably fueled all those weird attempts to find actual proof of it.
Yeah.
Right? The source material had some truly unbelievable examples of that stuff.
It's honestly astounding. Like in the 17th century England, some people genuinely believed the shape and proportions of a woman's neck could tell you if she was a virgin.
Her neck? You're kidding.
Not kidding. And even earlier, during the Renaissance, there was this notion that the clarity of someone's urine could reveal the same thing.
Clarity of pee. You really can't make this stuff up. Yeah. But, okay, the proof we probably hear about most often, the supposed physical marker, is the hymen.
Yes, the infamous hymen. And our sources do a really good job, I think, of clarifying what this actually is. Biologically, it's simply some leftover tissue from when a fetus develops, located near the vaginal opening.
Right. And the common idea, the sort of cultural story, is that it's this membrane that tears or breaks the whole popping your cherry thing the very first time someone has penis in vagina, or P&V, sex.
Yeah.
That it's this definitive physical sign.
Exactly, that's the myth. But the reality, as our sources clearly lay out, is quite different.
How so?
Well, for one thing, some people are just born with very little hymenal tissue to begin with.
Oh, okay.
And for those who do have more, it can thin out and change shape over time through a whole bunch of non-sexual activities.
Like what?
Things like exercise, riding a bike, using tampons, even just daily life and movement. So the key takeaway here isn't really about the tissue itself, but the completely unfounded meaning we've culturally piled onto it as some kind of proof of virginity.
So that idea of it being a reliable broken seal is just flat out wrong.
Pretty much, yeah.
And the source material even points out that medical experts totally agree neither looking at the hymen nor trying to assess, like, vaginal elasticity can definitively tell if someone has had P and V sex.
That's such a crucial point. The vagina is incredibly elastic. One source used a really helpful analogy, comparing it to a rubber band.
A rubber band.
Yes, it stretches and then it returns to its original state. And this elasticity remains even after something as significant as childbirth.
Oh, absolutely. I can attest to that. And what about the other big myth? That first P and V sex is always painful and always involves bleeding. That gets linked to the hymen tearing idea too, right?
That's another really significant misconception our sources tackle head on.
Yeah.
While pain or bleeding can happen, sure, it's definitely not universal. And importantly, it doesn't automatically mean the hymen was the cause.
So what else could cause it?
Discomfort can come from lots of things. Maybe muscle tension, anxiety, awkward positioning, not enough lubrication. And honestly, it can happen even if it's not your first time.
Right. Makes sense. So pulling all of this physical stuff together then,
Yeah.
the central insight seems to be that virginity just isn't a medical reality.
Exactly.
There's no physical test, no bodily sign that can actually definitively determine if someone has had penis and vagina sex.
Which then, raises a really important question for anyone listening. If it's not a physical state, then what is virginity exactly?
Good question.
Our sources offer a kind of compelling way to think about this. Consider the concept of money.
Money. Okay, that's an unexpected analogy. How does that help us understand virginity?
Well, think about it. Money isn't some tangible thing that occurs naturally and has inherent value, right?
No, it's paper or numbers.
Right. We, as a society, have basically collectively agreed to assign value to these pieces of paper or digital numbers. And that assigned value has very real, very significant impacts on our lives.
Okay, I see where you're going.
So similarly, while the experience of first P and V sex is certainly real and can be personally meaningful, the value and the meaning we attach to the concept of virginity itself is something that's been created and reinforced by our cultures.
Wow, okay, that really puts it in perspective. So it's about the shared agreement, the story we tell about it, not some intrinsic reality.
Pretty much. It's about the meaning we give it, not some biological truth.
Okay, I think I get the connection now. And to explain this idea further, the sources bring up this concept of sexual scripts.
Exactly. This idea, it was developed by sociologists Gagnon and Simon way back in the 1960s.
Right.
And it suggests that our understanding of sexuality is shaped less by just pure biological drives and more by the sort of social rules and expectations we learn throughout our lives. Think of sexual scripts as like the unwritten rules our society teaches us about how to act and think about sex in different situations. These scripts basically give us unspoken guidelines on what's considered, appropriate sexual behavior in various contexts.
So kind of like stage directions for our sexual lives. The source used the example of the eggplant emoji, which is so perfect.
Totally perfect example.
You send that emoji, and there's a whole script of potential meanings and expectations that just automatically comes with it.
Precisely. These scripts teach us what's seen as normal or correct sexual behavior. And what's really interesting here is how these sexual scripts often get tangled up with gender scripts, society's broader expectations about how men and women should behave in general.
Okay.
And traditionally, at least in many Western cultures, these scripts have been very heteronormative, assuming heterosexual relationships are the default.
Right.
And they often focus heavily on how men and women are supposedly supposed to act in relation to each other sexually. And these gendered scripts then become tools, really, to reinforce that virginity myth, creating different expectations and judgments for men versus women around sexual experience.
And the source gives some classic examples of those gendered sexual scripts, doesn't it? Like the idea that men are primarily focused on the physical side of sex.
Yeah.
While for women, it's supposedly all about emotional connection and intimacy.
Yes, those are really deeply ingrained ideas. But as our sources really emphasize, these traditional scripts aren't universal truths.
Right.
And they certainly aren't always helpful or even accurate for a lot of people. If they don't resonate with you, well, you have the agency to create your own narrative.
Which is important because these handed down scripts can actually cause real harm, can't they?
They definitely can. That's a really important point. How exactly do these virginity scripts and the gendered sexual scripts have negative impacts on people's lives?
Yeah. What did the sources say about that?
Well, what's quite concerning is how in cultures that place an extremely high value on female virginity, women can become really hesitant to seek essential sexual health care.
Like what kind of care?
Our sources specifically mentioned pap smears, which are crucial for screening for cervical cancer.
Oh.
Some women in these contexts apparently fear that just undergoing that procedure might somehow compromise their perceived virgin status.
Seriously.
Or that it might reveal to someone that they've had peen v sex, even though that's not what the test is for at all.
That's a terrible consequence, putting your health at risk because of a social idea.
It really is. And then there are the more general rigid gender roles that these scripts reinforce, often from a really young age, as the source material points out.
How so?
Well, boys might be subtly, or not so subtly, encouraged to explore and be assertive in sexual contexts, maybe while also feeling pressure to suppress emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Girls, on the other hand, might get scripts emphasizing the need to be careful, prioritize others' feelings, maybe guard their reputation.
Right.
Growing up with these really contrasting scripts can create these perceived massive differences between men and women,
Yeah.
which can lead to miscommunications and unrealistic expectations in relationships later on.
It almost feeds right into that whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of thinking, which the source also mentioned.
Exactly.
That book really pushed this idea that men and women are just fundamentally different creatures, like operating on completely different wavelengths sexually and emotionally.
And as our sources highlight, while that book made a lot of claims, they aren't actually strongly supported by scientific research.
Really?
Yeah, there's this concept called the gender similarities hypothesis, championed by psychologist Janet Hyde.
Okay.
And her work, looking at decades of research, actually shows that men and women are far more alike than different in most psychological areas, including many aspects of sexuality.
Interesting.
Even in areas where differences are sometimes observed, like maybe masturbation frequency or attitudes toward casual sex, the actual size of those differences is often pretty small to moderate, not these huge gulfs the Mars-Venus' idea suggests.
But hold on. Even those differences that do exist, the source suggests, might not be purely biological.
Exactly.
They can be significantly shaped by these very social scripts we're talking about.
That's a key point.
Like the example given. Maybe boys are encouraged from a young age to touch their genitals for hygiene, just basic cleaning.
Right.
While girls might receive messages, maybe implicit, maybe explicit, that their vulva is somehow private, mysterious, or even off limits, except for specific functions.
Precisely. And when you think about attitudes towards casual sex, you absolutely cannot overlook the glaring double standard that's often baked right into the virginity script.
What double standard is that?
The idea that it's somehow shameful or lowers a girl's value if she has premarital sexual experience, but it's often expected, sometimes even celebrated, for boys to gain sexual experience, sowing their wild oats and all that.
Right. And then those expectations often flip or get complicated as people get older, don't they?
They really do. It's just a real tangle of contradictory and, frankly, often damaging messages.
So, okay, given all of this history, the lack of biology, the harmful scripts, what's the empowering takeaway for people listening? How can we navigate all this stuff?
Well, I think the most empowering message is that these scripts are just that they're scripts. They are narratives we've been handed down.
Not facts.
Not facts, not unchangeable truths carved in stone. Even if you find that some traditional parts of these scripts kind of resonate with you personally, you might still run into places where they feel limiting or restrictive.
Right, like the source material mentioned how societal scripts might make it harder for, say, a man to express vulnerability without feeling judged, or for a woman to openly explore her own sexuality without facing slut-shaming or something similar.
Exactly, those kinds of things. So how do we start to break free from those limits?
Yeah.
The key, as our sources put it quite beautifully, I thought, is to edit them, scribble in the margins, write your own plot. You, the listener, you have the agency. You get to decide which parts of these cultural stories actually feel right for you and which parts you want to rewrite completely.
You even shared a personal thought about reframing a, let's say, less than ideal first P&V experience by consciously rejecting the rigid, often negative virginity script that society tries to impose on that moment.
Yeah, it's about taking back the narrative.
And it's so true, isn't it? Once you realize that these are just stories we've been told maybe for generations,
Yeah.
you gain this power to decide which parts feel authentic to you and which ones you just want to revise or maybe just toss out entirely.
Right.
And ultimately creating more freedom for everyone to define their own experiences and their own sexuality.
Yeah.
That's got to be beneficial for all of us, surely.
Absolutely. So to kind of bring it all together, is virginity a real thing?
The big question.
Our deep dive into these sources makes it pretty clear, I think, that it isn't some physical absolute. It doesn't hold any inherent universal value.
Right.
It's fundamentally a cultural script, one of many that our society provides to help us navigate, life and relationships.
But, and this feels like the really crucial point for you listening to take away.
Mm-hmm.
These scripts aren't objective truths. They're not binding contracts. You have the power, the agency, to decide which parts you want to keep, which parts fit you, and which parts you want to rewrite for yourself.
Exactly. And this raises maybe a final important question for you to just sort of mull over.
Okay.
How might understanding that virginity is a social construct, not a biological fact, change the way you view your own past experiences? Or maybe how you view the expectations that are placed on you or on others in your life?
That's a good thought to end on.
Yeah, maybe take some time to just reflect on the various scripts you encounter, sexual or otherwise, and consider which ones you might want to revise. Or maybe even write a completely new ending for.